What next?
Platform loan.
I'll just let you know we're back live again.
Well, I apologise to anybody who's out there
Yeah.
viewing this that you, for technical reasons, you missed an interesting debate on one or two items. But we're now looking at speed indicator device and considering future locations. Councillor Fuller's already suggested a location on Blackthorn Road.
I just wonder if there's an opportunity for TPP to be part of the discussion where we get the speed indicator. It's part of the study. 'Cause that's imminent, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I can
Yes,
send them
amount of
the
logic to-
information about, I think Ian sent an email earlier saying about whether we should send it to them and whether we should send it to police.
Well, we're right in the middle of working with them.
Hmm.
This is simply more information, and we can provide them with information. I can't see that there's going to be any effect extra cost.
Oh, no.
And then responding to this, it could be taken from transport with, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I would be happy enough to suggest that we delegate it to the transport group who might well seek the assistance of TPP who they're already working with.
I'll have a chat with the car contact,
Yeah.
Michael, and see, because I need to talk to him anyway about where we are
Mhm.
in general.
I think if the police, involve the police, but whether they pay that as well. I think they will, because at the end of the day, the traffic surveys, they don't get the results we've got. It's slightly contradictory.
But we did also have some input, which we could just pass on, seems to me, and they can make of it what they will. And when you think about it, Blackthorn Road seems pretty obvious, Bennefield Road seems pretty obvious. Blackpot Lane, we've got a number of parked cars on that.
It stops
It's
the
difficult to
traffic.
actually get any speed up.
I
The-
mean,
The road service is not great either.
These were suggestions from members of the public. I think whatever suggestions have been given, I'll have to speak to Highways, because at the moment we've only got 2 locations on our licence. We can add more, but I think they have to come out and see, because you need to have, I think, 100 metres, so that, you know, so you can't just put it anywhere, because obviously if you've got a bend and it's obviously got to be somewhere suitable. It's got to be on a suitable post that can take the weight. So I could speak to the guy that I speak to at Highways about these locations and see if we can get somebody out to have a look at them.
New Road is another one, because that's always the general way. And I disagree, but we'll find out from this.
Would we want a two-pronged approach by going to TPP on the one hand and have the clerk go to Highways on the other? to
Yeah,
open
well, I mean,
up some
TPP
discussions?
wouldn't be able to tell us, yes, put your,
No.
yeah, that's a highway thing.
Yes, they can,
Mm.
certainly can't, otherwise even if they have.
But they can certainly have a look at, the data that we've just taken.
Let them see the data and this information.
Yeah.
And Councillor King will coordinate that, and if you could
Okay.
talk to Highways as well, and then we'll see where we are next month. Assuming you're- Even more, bearing in mind we've got a town meeting where I think we're hoping to play something about what the transport study is.
yeah.
Okay.
We've got confidence in time, we'll talk about it in the time meeting agenda, but yeah.
Right, okay. Treaty store. Before we get there, we'll receive an update on the new crossing and cycleway on Blackthorn Road.
It's there.
Right, well, that's the shortest update on probably having some time.
There were a few
Exactly.
comments on Facebook.
I'm moving my cycling group to go backwards and forwards across it
I-
online.
Yeah.
It's going to take a while to get to our usual 40k.
Yeah.
Well done.
Right.
Now there is a cycleway, I feel I must use it.
Good.
Okay, well, that brings us on to planning. Excuse me, yet the excuse. The minutes of the meeting have been circulated. For those of you who paid particular attention to it, you'll notice that after the consideration of the usual planning matters, which are all set out there, and I don't propose to go into unless somebody specifically asks, but there were a couple of other specific matters on the agenda, one of which I thought was going to be on the agenda tonight as a specific item. I'm going to sneak it in anyway because it's part of receiving the minutes. Because the minute PC 2191 talks about call for sites. Councillor Fleck said, where do we go after 2031? And the answer is, they're already beginning to think about it. I know that we haven't actually started the Part 2 examination yet of a plan which, as a masterstroke roundel, proposes 3 sites, 2 of which have already got, well, one of which now has got full planning permission, one of which has got outline permission with reserved matters imminent, and the third one of which has got an extant planning application. But leave that to one side until the next bit. But there's now a call for sites. The way it was phrased, it was quite clear that it was not a call for sites in the sense of asking OTC to comment on specific sites or recommend specific sites. It was literally a call to landowners to come forward, much as was done with the strategic housing land, what the AA stood for, the something, sure. Some considerable time ago. It struck the planning committee that there had been a bit of a fiasco in connection with the local plan part 2, because a particular site was discounted on the basis that it hadn't been advanced, when in fact it clearly had. It was clearly being factored into our own neighbourhood plan calculations, and indeed was one of the sites that was included in our neighbourhood plan. So after a bit of discussion, we agreed that as a council, we would alert various people who we knew had put forward land for consideration in connection with our neighbourhood plan to make sure that they didn't miss it. And I'm aware that at least the person who was the quote-unquote victim of the local plan part 2 scenario was actually aware, it was actually quite pleased that we'd taken the trouble to make sure that he was aware. But it does raise a secondary issue because it was suggested within the planning group, not a recommendation, really a suggestion, this issue at this meeting, because obviously OTC owns land. And the question obviously arises as to whether OTC should, as a landowner, be putting forward any particular land for potential development purposes. Actually, if you think about our land holdings, a lot of it's in buildings, which clearly aren't part of the equation. The actual real land masses, if we call them that, are currently the War Memorial Recreation Ground, but I think that there would be certainly practical and legal issues around changing it into everything else, quite apart from the potential public outcry, I suspect. The sports clubs down Occupation Road, where our current policies are very clear that they should remain sports clubs down Occupation Road, although at least one of them is wondering if the site they've got there is big enough, may or may not raise issues for the future. And the Stark Meadow. And really, that's about it. And I have to say, thinking about those as land areas, I would personally, and I speak purely in a personal capacity, be astonished if we wanted to put forward any of them for any kind of development, because they're all important open spaces in a town that lacks them. And it seems to me that if we're trying to get our hands on Fletton Field, because of the lack of public open space around it, we might just be accused of gross hypocrisy if we then decided to put forward one or more of those pieces of land for some kind of residential development. Stop me if I'm wrong. Does anybody want to discuss that further?
No.
I think the only thing I would say is that there may be something in the future in terms of Occupation Road for one particular part, because they are a bit landlocked down there, and it is a bit of a weird place, in my opinion, sometimes, to have some of the clubs down there. So I don't think, for me, it wouldn't be, of course we'd protect them, of course I'd want to protect them. But there was other ideas once that maybe you create another opportunity for sports clubs in general and use the land. I wouldn't exclude that. I'm not saying get rid of Wallingford or anything, but I wouldn't exclude the thought processes, but not Snipe or anywhere like that. Not the not the Warmore ground. I mean that's got to keep on with that.
Well, I suppose the question is, as there may or may not be some issues about some of the land holdings, but I would find it, I'm not aware of any issues surrounding either the bowls club or the tennis club potentially wanting to relocate, and that only actually leaves one down there. Advancing that in this process as a possible development of something, to me, is going to end up sending out all the wrong messages. It could cause a certain degree of panic, possibly with other entities like the tennis club and like the bowls club, who, given that access to that site, would almost certainly have to come down Occupation Road and therefore immediately past stroke through the tennis club, which has got courts on either side, for example. If that is going to be an issue as a result of any particular occupant maybe wanting to go, and it may well be that they never will, I think at that point it's a matter for the estates group to look at it and come up with some recommendations to full council. So I personally wouldn't be suggesting that we put this forward by a deadline that's a matter of weeks away. Councillor.
And the estates have begun a conversation with the Scouts group using the Jones Strong Centre as to whether they have any interest in being relocated and that site becoming available. But again, because of the timescales, I mean, we're right at the very outset of beginning that, and there are so many contingent decisions that would allow that to happen. It's to understand what it means to put the site forward.
I think the other thing would be that Jones Strong Centre site, were it to become available, would clearly amount to a windfall site anyway, because you can't get very much on there.
No.
Because possibly land at Occupation Road would be of a sufficient size that it would be the sort of thing that could come forward in this kind of process.
It's a no-brainer. You don't go anywhere near it until, you can't. So I'm happy to.
Does anybody demur from that view?
The private landholders. No.
Not in the timescale that we've got.
No, quite.
Yes. It's not a question of ruling it out for all time,
No.
but we rule out responding to this particular land availability assessment. Which reminds me what the AA stood for, which I'm actually called availability assessment. Briefly, because I think it was also touched on by Councillor Cronin earlier, we have of course got the local plan part 2 examination coming up. And you'll know it was decided that a representative would go. And at the time I said, well, I'll see what I can do, etc. And then went home and looked at my diary and realised I was supposed to go on holiday. Didn't think it would go down pretty well to suggest that instead of going on our 4 times postponed holiday, I'd go and sit in Thrapston for 7 days. So very happily, from my point of view, Councillor Arnold came to my rescue and volunteered to do it. He and I had a meeting earlier this evening with our NNC representative and former councillor and mayor, Tony Robinson, who has particular interest and knowledge about the St Christopher's Drive site, which is actually coming up for approval of reserved matters on Monday. So we've been talking about a strategy to deal with Monday's meeting about that site, which Councillor Arnold was again coming here to do, as well as the situation with regard to the local plan part 2, where we did decide that it was important that we sent a speaker, notwithstanding the fact that we have, of course, made detailed limitations before. Of course, as I indicated earlier, there is a complete nonsense about this. In as much as we ended up going into an examination of the soundness of a plan that allocates 3 sites for development in Amdor. For all intents and purposes, it's a 2/3 done deal. It may very well end up as a completely done deal before we even got the results of the examination. We could be confronted with the most bizarre scenario of the inspector saying that none of these sites are suitable, and all of them having planning permission, which says something about the system, which is gone very badly awry. And I rather suspect that following the examination, the planning committee might very well be considering whether or not to raise this issue with our Member of Parliament, because it strikes me that legislation is needed to prevent anything like this happening again. But there is going to be the examination. Councillors may have picked up on the fact that there are, I think, 12 matter areas that are going to be discussed. And once you've got past 3 very general points, the very first specific point is housing allocation in Amdor, which fits the pattern because, of course, it was the issue around housing allocation in Amdor that delayed the local plan part 2 for so long in the first place, because it was the area where, perhaps somewhat to their astonishment, they ended up getting literally hundreds of representations from the town, quite far from those that this council made, about the sites that were being proposed. So it warrants a session all on its own in this examination, and it's the first session of its type. So I think it'll be a question of probably a report from Councillor Arnold to our next meeting, all being well, about what takes place. Unless anybody's got any other questions on planning, I'm conscious of time moving on. We move us on to estate matters, the first of which is simply to receive the minutes from the estates meeting held on the 22nd of February, and having actually been promoted, Councillor Holmes to be chair of that, which I think is actually Councillor Davis, who isn't here.
Yeah, I have no idea.
So my apologies for that earlier. But unless there are any issues arising out of those minutes.
Now, I would just recommend to people that they do read the minutes, because we are dealing with a lot of, really interesting stuff, which is our big decisions for the council that we're taking on your behalf. So please do take the time to read them.
Indeed. Right. To consider plans for the new skate park and agree to progress with Maverick to finalise a plan. Do you know,
I'm sorry that neither Paul nor Ian is here, who are the who know a lot more about this than I do. But certainly we looked at. I think we had two replies to the tender document. Was it? Just the two?
Yes, yeah.
And one was much more interesting, let's say, than the other. I believe Ian has already spoken to his consultation group.
The users, yeah.
Yeah, user group. And in fact, what they want is even simpler than anything that he had in his mind. So we'd like to recommend that we continue to work with them. And we're hoping to get a decision on whether the Section 106 money for outdoor recreation that's been sitting around for years can be moved to this, in which case the funding we'd need to find elsewhere will be much more manageable. But everything depends on getting funding. You know, we're not going to ask the council to commit money. You know, there might be bits and pieces here and there, but the main funding for it, the plan comes from the Section 106 money and a grant application. So it's just to say that we keep going with Maverick. Their plan is exactly what the users want, so why not?
Do you want a proposal?
It says consider, agree to progress. I mean,
I
I
think
don't
we
know.
we need to agree, but I think
I'm happy to.
realistically, I don't hear any words of
No.
So
dissent.
sorry, that was O2 and O3.
Yeah, that's-
Yeah, well, it's going to be on the opinion. So I think you can take it that it is agreed, we accept the recommendation that's come forward. And the second part of which it says to agree to use the Section 106 funding of £70,208 to pay toward the cost of the new skate park, subject, as it were, to what Councillor Hoyle says, which is that it's not actually committing it, it's making it available for use towards it, subject to all the other funding.
Yeah, and it's also NNC giving permission that they will release it for that purpose.
Yeah, they've already
have
said
done
they
that.
have given them, because this money was money that was originally set aside for Fletton Field. But we're sort of on well, we've only got really until May to commit it, which isn't that long away. And the council did agree a couple of months ago that but it was to be used for outdoor recreation. Whereas now we're actually saying that, you know, you're happy for it to be used for the skate park.
Do you need a proposal?
I think bearing in mind that it's £70,000, we might do this with a proper
Yeah.
proposal. I'll second it. Those in favour? Everybody? Right. Interesting that the next item says communications working party, because I think we might want to publicise the fact that we've just reached the decision we had in relation to the skate park and is moving hopefully rapidly ahead. Right. Communication working party to receive an update from the meeting and to approve the agenda and format for the annual town meeting. Sure, who's speaking to this?
So, me and the mayor and the clerk had a virtual call last week. So the clerk's published the agenda as in the pack. So I haven't been to a town meeting for a while now, but normally it's kind of expected all councillors should be there and you should all have a name badge on and that sort of thing, because it's a statutory thing. This is a statutory meeting. And the financial stuff has to be sort of, you know, be transparent about that. But we are town's representatives. So that's the flow. Normally we would have chairs of the committees talking to their particular bits, just to break up the sound of the chair's voice, which is the mayor, and probably doing Q&A as we go along, it looks like to me. So I think what we're going to have it so that we do it on the side, not on the stage.
Yeah.
It's a bit trickier if you put everything on the stage, so it'll be that way around, if you see what I mean. And it'll be a bit of PowerPoint, lots of conversations and questions, hopefully. Hopefully there'll be a big turnout. Sometimes that's a good thing, sometimes it means they're bringing something, which is fine. So that, I mean, that's where we've got a lot of experience of doing this. I think loads of experience, sound system, that kind of thing.
I mean, there's nothing specifically on here in relation to, for example, reports about estate matters or
No.
planning matters or whatever. That actually looks like quite a full agenda anyway.
There is a lot, and
Whether or not we might want to add an 11th item, which is questions that don't relate to any of the first 10. Because otherwise somebody might not feel able to ask the question that they would really like to ask, because it's nowhere on the agenda.
what it means, I agree with that, because we used to do panels, didn't we? Not panels, but you have to be chaired really tightly because the time can literally.
We did talk about asking, when we sort of start advertising it, asking people to send in questions, or even having, let's say we start running out of time, people then sort of maybe saying to people that they could write a question down and then we would answer it. But I don't know, unless we also do questions as we go along, but what you don't want to do is on one particular item, you get stuck with a lot of different questions and then you're rushing to get the rest of the agenda completed.
I think Ian's got a slide deck, sorry, the man in the chair's got a slide deck that put together the presentation
Yeah,
for the night, and things will be available on the night, so I'm sure he would have spoken more, unfortunately can't be here on
No.
tonight, but I'll wait for some more positive direction from the chair.
I think the key is to have the sort of presentation near enough done by the next full council, well it'll have to be, by the next full council meeting, so that you'll be able to see it then, you know, the final stages.
Yeah, and I'll take it, so there will be some preliminary stuff from the transport study, fresh off the press, and I'll take that bit. Obviously, Councillor Fuller will talk about the Jubilee part, and all. There's some obvious
Yeah,
talk speakers and things, so I think it will just tighten up the detail post tonight, if you agree with the agenda as it stands.
Are we all happy with what's suggested? Something interesting. Right, thank you, thanks again. Personnel matters. To receive the minutes from Personnel Committee meeting, they have been circulated. Which takes us on to correspondence. All for information, so the usual monthly employment law update, a bulletin from Northamptonshire Acre in February, and the March leaders update.
Well, there is a message about Ukraine, just spotted. The leaders update.
Yeah,
So there is a comment.
Yes. Right, well that seems we're all just to any other matters for report. I'll start with my left, Councillor Holden.
No, I'm all right, thanks.
Councillor King.
Not for me, but just.
Councillor Randall. Councillor Hutton. Councillor Fuller.
Yeah.
Councillor Arnold.
No, thank you.
Indeed, yes. Right, well, let me just report one thing. One of the pleasures of being either mayor or deputy mayor is that every 12 months or thereabouts, you have the annual meeting of the Anglican Church Clock Fund. And the first time ever, it was conducted by Zoom. Unfortunately, Reverend Webster wasn't able to be there. Neither of you was there. In fact, it was somewhat postponed because it took place on the 3rd of January last year, but I was there. Councillor King's slightly wrong with his time estimate. I actually think it was 10 minutes, not 3. I mean, it is the shortest meeting I attended really that I've sat here. But just a couple of issues really. When they presented their accounts, which actually go back a bit, I noticed that there wasn't in fact any donation from the council, which invariably there has been, because we usually make a regular contribution. And then they explained that actually they're taking a conscious decision not to contact us and actually ask us for any money, because they had sufficient money, in their view, in reserves to meet their usual expenditure, which broadly speaking is between £300 and £400 a year on the servicing of the clock. And it's not that long ago that it went through a refurbishment process. And the Fibbies usually make a contribution of £350 and did, which broadly speaking covered the costs of the maintenance work. And with the balance that they have being in the region of £1,000, it's actually enough to cover 3 years' work. So they didn't ask us for any money. They're not envisaging asking us for any money in the coming financial year either, assuming that there are no disasters. But they did want to thank the council for our contributions in the past and doubtless will come to us as and when it becomes necessary to do so. I'm about to tell it. There wasn't really anything else in it to report. That, I think, concludes the meeting, and I've done slightly better than 25 councillor King in 2020. So I'll be meeting.
Thank you very much.
Councillor Holland, can you have a minute?
Yeah, just have a word about